walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live, which is also listed in your program. You can also follow us on Instagram at JFK Junior Forum. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming tonight's guests and our moderator, Ambassador Swanee Hunt.
Thank you. You know, over the last 20 years, I have had the honor of being up here about 30 times to oversee, to facilitate meetings like this. And there is not one time that I think has been more intriguing to me than tonight. Because in the past, I've thought about how there's this famous person and there's that, you know, what big star, et cetera, or I've had people who were actively trying to bring peace to the Middle East, women in general. Oh, you know, I was a founder of the Women in Public Policy program, so like women is my thing, right? and so, or I've had, you know, women working on getting the peace agreement in Colombia, or working, you know, in Cambodia, etc. And I've never thought about you all. I've never thought about when I was in Rwanda, all of those visits, and talking with the women, 90 women in my book, etc. And I never thought about what it was like to be one of those children that the women in my book would describe as the mothers were heartbroken over the slaughter of their children, but there's one who made it. You know, the other 7 were killed, but I had this one daughter who survived. And so here we are, and you are the one daughter who survived. I don't have words, you don't have words. We've spent some time together. We will continue to, because I can't live without you now. But it is an extraordinary experience for me. I guess I said I don't have words, so I better stop talking. So would you all introduce yourselves to the people here? And you have a following online as well. And so say just a couple of sentences about who you are, meaning particularly what you're doing nowadays. I mean, if you want to locate yourselves during the genocide, but let us know who you are in your work nowadays, okay?
Sure. Thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Carine Bogus. I was 8 years old during the genocide, and for years afterwards, I sort of shied away from that 8-year-old story, and I wanted to live as quote-unquote normal of a life as possible. And I moved to the US when I was 17, went to college, and it wasn't until the Save Darfur movement was getting started that I realized that I had to speak up, because if I didn't, who else would? I have lived this life, and I felt the need to go out there and share my story with the hope to move people to action. I have spoken for the past 14 years now, and I talk to different groups, high schools, college students, general public, and I share my story, again, trying to get people to pay more attention in terms of issues that relate to genocide. And most importantly, something that's very dear to me is that while we survived, meaning we didn't die, we really truly continue to live with the consequences of genocide, and I try to shed light on what survivors are dealing with 25 years later.
I'm Yvonne Umugwaneza. I was only 14 years old when the genocide happened, and I lost almost my entire family. Then, after genocide, when I finished my high school, I was able to see the pain, the sorrow, and all the unfortunate events that were happening around me among the genocide survivors, not to mention even my family, those who survived. That pushed me to feel that I need to be a voice for the voiceless. So that's how I worked in the media. I was a journalist back home, and I used that opportunity, that platform, to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. But it pushed me to want to do more. That's when I went to work at Kigali Genocide Memorial Center. There, not only you work with people who are coming in and out, Rwandans and international or foreigners, but also you get to work hands in hands with the genocide survivors, especially in a program we had called Social Program. That's a program that takes care of genocide survivors who are vulnerable because of what they went through during the genocide. That made me realize that helping as we did was not enough. We need to do much more. That's why right now I'm a student. I'm a graduate student at TCU, that's a Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. I'm doing my master's in social work because what I want is to make an impact in those lives. And to be able to do that, I need to be able to do it on a bigger scale. And that the way we can be able to do that is to learn and to earn those skills that we need to be able to use so that we can be able to provide what our people need, because we survived. So if we did survive, we need to be able to keep the memories of our beloved ones alive, but also carrying those ones who cannot carry themselves with us, not leaving them behind.
Thank you.
Hi all, thank you for being with us tonight. My name is Providence Nkurunziza, and by the time the genocide took place, I was 11 years old. And after 25 years of commemoration, we think like I have to raise awareness of what happened, especially that I was young at that age, and I was one of 8 siblings in my entire family, and only 3 of us survived. So I said, because I survived, I have to be a voice for my family, I have to be a voice for my parents and my siblings who are not here anymore. I lost almost everybody of my family, and after the genocide, I managed to walk to Kigali Genocide Memorial Center as well, and I worked with women affected by HIV because they have been raped. I said, because of this, the world has to know what the women and ladies went through, because they were targeted and they lived the really, really worst life you can imagine. And that's how I decided to raise awareness about the atrocities of the genocide and educate of its worst, that it may not happen anywhere in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my name is Yvonne Umugwaneza. My earliest memories as a child, it was the first day of genocide, and that became a flashback for my whole teen years. I was in a neighbor's, my grandparents' neighbor's home, and they had killed everyone, and I was the only one standing. And that became a nightmare after genocide. I didn't know really what happened, or just all those dreams came, but they came to me as though everyone in my house after genocide, they're being killed. But that memory, they were calling me a snake, a cockroach, and I didn't really understand. Of course, as a 3.5 years old, that I didn't really know what was happening and why am I, treated that way. It wasn't until I was 16 years old, and my high school actually visited where you were working, Kigali Genocide Memorial. And it was the first time for me being there, and I I found myself in a room of children who were killed during the genocide, and some of them were my age. So I grew up with anger and not understanding why my neighbors killed each other and why did they kill the Tutsis, why did they kill my family. I didn't get it. But that was the moment I realized, wait a minute, at least I'm alive, you know, I survived. These kids did not have the chance to live their dreams. So that moment really changed my life, and it made me who I am right now. I've been here for almost 5 years, and when I got here, I realized how much the world needs to know what happened in Rwanda and how it came about and how we're living with consequences, and wrote my first memoir, Embracing Survival, because that's what we had to do. We did not have a choice. We had to embrace it so we can be able to live and keep the memory of our beloved ones alive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. My name is Samantha Lakin, and I remember my first commemoration in Rwanda was 6 years ago, was the 19th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi, and this year we mark the 25th commemoration, or the 25th anniversary. And I'm fortunate to have been able to work on issues I care so much about, specifically looking at memory and justice after the genocide, but also spending time in communities and meeting amazing women like these who we are able to bring together today and share this time with each other and with you to remember, but also to speak about moving forward and to speak about what Rwanda is today, how it's viewed today, and how women have played such a central role in that.
Will you give us a very brief, like just a few points of description of how this happened? Because people in this space, I'm sure, have very different levels of information about what this was really about.
Sure, yes. So as Ambassador Hunt said, people come into a public audience like the forum with different knowledge of what happened in Rwanda. And I'm actually going to take away the burden of history in some ways from the women so they can share what they know best, which is their own experiences and their own work. And so there are a few points that I think are important to mention about the genocide, the time leading up to genocide, and the time during the genocide. The first thing to mention is actually about a misconception that Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa in Rwanda were ethnicities, and in actuality, they were social classes. So Tutsi were those who reared cattle, who had more money because cattle equaled wealth. Hutu were poorer, they were farmers, and Twa were indigenous people, hunters and gatherers. People could move throughout the categories, and the categories weren't very salient. So it's not an ethnic war or tribal hatreds. The second thing to mention is that genocide was prepared and planned with a significant amount of propaganda coming from a Hutu extremist government that prepared, since independence of Rwanda in 1962, the systematic dehumanization of Tutsi people, which set the stage for what happened in 1994.
And when we say dehumanization, we're talking cockroaches.
Yes, absolutely. We're talking about words like inyenzi, yibjitso, like cockroaches or accomplices or spies, that Tutsi don't belong here, they're our enemies, they're going to take our jobs, a lot of this rhetoric. The third thing I wanted to mention is that even though it was the Hutu government that perpetrated the genocide, which was widespread and systematic, meaning that a lot of people participated. Either they were directly killing, or they were participating in other ways, rounding people up, or they were involved in looting or denouncing or other activities. Not all Hutu are perpetrators. Just because the Hutu extremists were the ones who perpetrated the genocide, not all Hutu people were perpetrators, and we have stories of people who saved as well. The next thing I want to mention is that in 1994, when the genocide began, this genocide specifically against Tutsi, about 800,000 to 1 million people were killed in only 100 days between April, right after the Easter holiday, until July. and it was about 10% of the population that died in those days, making it one of the most horrific and significant systematic massacres of the modern era. The last thing to say, to set the stage, is that imagining the aftermath of this tragedy is impossible still for me, even after having conducted over 150 interviews with Rwandans who survived and who lived through the genocide. Every Rwandan is affected, and that means that every Rwandan has been involved in the recovery process. And I think that's really what we're going to hear from the women about today. So I hope that kind of sets the stage for why we're here 25 years later and where we're going both today and in the future with these subjects.
Is it appropriate for at a commemoration like this to have a minute of silence?
Yes.
I would
So,
think. Do we stand to do that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So because we're convening this at the 25th commemoration, we're thinking back and we're also thinking forward. So if we can please stand, thank you, and take 1 minute of silence to remember the victims of the genocide. We'll do that together before we continue our conversation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's all push our chairs back a little. I'm feeling bad for you all over there. So yeah, everybody push your chairs back a little, okay? We have a big crowd today. Now, I'm going to give you the 2-minute version because you keep hearing about Rwanda has all of these women in parliament, far, far exceeding the next in line. And the way that happened is that women got themselves on the Constitutional Commission, and they were pivotal to getting that 30% rule that you've heard about that said any government organ has to have 30% women, and that created set-asides in the parliament. And so the women voted for women for those seats. But that's not the whole story. You have this pull from the top, from the political leadership, but that only worked because you had this massive push from the bottom with a whole pyramid of 15,000 village councils that were women only. So all of this had been organized, and those women went into those 30% seats. So how do you get to 64, 66% of women in the parliament if just 30% are set aside? Really, really interesting. I didn't know this until I was 3/4 of the way through writing this book. What happened is the women in that 30%, a significant number of them said, I have great name recognition. I know a lot of what's happening across this country. People trust me because I've been in these positions for a while. I think I'm going to give up my seat. I'm going to give up my seat for a woman, she would say, for one of my sisters, who is not as accomplished, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to run against the men. And that's how they came to be 64% of the parliament, because they were so effective once they got into the parliament. And that's also how you end up with major changes in the land reform, the inheritance law, and gender-based violence laws. I mean, the spectacular World Economic Forum stats that tell you that this country, has just soared economically, but also in terms of health and the well, really every other kind of measurement. All right, now we are turning to you, and just take it from there. I mean, anything that Samantha said, that I've said, that you all want to take off on.
Sure, I think I'll start. One of the things to note about that is how extraordinary this is Rwanda is a tradition, went from being a traditional country where gender roles were pretty heightened to essentially having women take over different leadership roles. But I think you can even go back to women in general, right? I think for the women in the audience, and men, because we all have women in our lives, we tend to want to be what's missing. You know, we tend to fill the role that's empty in our lives, and we try to fix what's broken. And whether that comes up as these younger women who took on the role of mothers, for example, for younger orphans. There's a lot of women who were even in their early teenage years who took care of younger siblings or family members, to women who organized and actually formed organizations to support other women and children. So it's extraordinary, but it's not unusual to find women kind of stepping up and rising to the occasion when that need presents itself. I think that's a good way to put it.
Absolutely. Not only women stepped up right after genocide, because like Carine mentioned, they had to do it because it was a must, but also I need to remind everyone that men were killed in majority more than women. So we had many women survived than men who survived. So these women worked together with the rest of the country. That's why today I can tell you there are many things you would like to know about Rwanda, but I'm gonna give you only 3 things. First, there is strength in unity when people work together, deciding to move forward. That is a very important thing. And that's what Rwanda is using or has been using, because we had our darkest moment 25 years ago. But together, we rose back up and we moved forward together. But to be able to do that, there was also another important component, that was gender equality. Like Carine mentioned, there was culturally, there was that imbalance between gender. Men were more important. I would say that they would just occupy positions in the leadership, and they would be the one to handle important tasks and skills. But they had to balance that out so that women can also feel that importance as they are moving forward, as they are contributing to the rebuilding of the country. Now, there was education. Women most of the time will be behind, but that was addressed. They are no longer behind, which gives them equal chances on the job market when they're going to compete for the market for jobs.
Wait, when you say they're not behind now, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is, before genocide, girls could be limited to what education they have access to. For example, they were not allowed to do science. Today, there is no limit to anything. You are a girl, you want to pursue your science majors, you are allowed to do that. Nobody steps in your way. The same way a boy, nobody will stand in their way, whatever they want to do, whether science or nursing. So it's up to you to do what you want to do as long as you are capable. So we have now equal standard to be measured on. Because before, boys were being measured on a higher standard, yes, but women were considered weak in a sense, but it's no longer the same, which gives them the same ability, the same skills, and the same opportunities. If a woman and a man, they are working in the same position with same skills, with the same education background, even the pay is equal. Women are not being paid less because they are women, or men are being paid more because they are men. That is not the case.
Oh yeah, that's the same as the United States.
I don't know about that, but if it is, then that means Rwanda and United States can be measured equally on that level, which is, I'll say that I'm proud of that, if that's the case. But that shows you how Rwanda decided to move everyone together. But if you have women and men working together, being treated equally, you also need to remember that we had in the past some hindrance for women, which is gender violence. So Rwanda decided to eradicate also gender violence, mainly domestic violence, which didn't seem to bother many people at the time. And now it bothers everybody, men and women. And not only women can be abused in many ways, in different ways, but we have also learned later on that also men can be abused. So that means when women stopped being abused in any way, also they started to advocate for men, that no men also can be abused.
I will add something on what you said. I agree with everything you said. There was also, I think Rwanda did not have a choice to not have women in power. Because before the genocide, you talked about the propagandas and all that. We had young demographic of young guys who were in the 20s, late teens. Those are the ones they trained to kill. So during the genocide, all those young Hutus, they were perpetrators, and that meant that after genocide, they will all be in jail. And when they were killing during the genocide, like you mentioned, men were killed first, and then they would go to women, or sometimes they would get killed, right, all of them at the same time. But men were the first target. So after genocide, most of the people who had one parent, most of the time, 80% of those who had one parent was a woman. So that woman would they were single moms for many years. So they had to be the fathers, the moms, the aunts, the uncle, the grandparents. So that children who grew up also that way, they realized that, wait a minute, a woman can do anything. So it created that strength in young girls to know that I can study anything. I can go all the way to the United States by myself. That's me. And so we kind of learned from that tragedy, and though we get here, and then the only question we hear is about Hotel Rwanda. But
you made a point talking about Hotel Rwanda. Hotel Rwanda is not Rwanda. Whenever you mention Rwanda to somebody, they may ask you, where are you coming from? And you say, I'm from Rwanda. Or they say, oh, wait, we know Hotel Rwanda. And they are thinking Hotel Rwanda is in Rwanda, and our country, we don't want our country to be, linked to Hotel Rwanda, because Hotel Rwanda is one thing, and our country is something else. And our country is the strongest thing more than Hotel Rwanda, that is a movie, and that is done in more Hollywood, way better than, way better than what the story is. We want to clarify that Hotel Rwanda is one thing aside that is really, really baby to what our country is now. We want to clarify that our country is strongest and has more meaning, more than what Hotel Rwanda is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Pravi and Carine, also earlier today you were speaking about the resilience of Rwandan people. Can you maybe give us an example or tell us a little bit more what that means to you? I think, as you said, being more than Hotel Rwanda means being beyond just the negative or the terrible thing that happened. What does that mean in terms of resilience?
Thank you. Yeah, our country is really a remarkable country right now, because starting from the scratch, I mean, right after the genocide, I really don't have what I can tell before the genocide that I can compare. But what I know is that our country went really, really down. And after the genocide, we started from the scratch. And from the scratch we were up to where we are today, in those 25 years, I can say that our country was born again, and our country counted from the genocide on. And when you see the reconstruction, when you see the progress, we mentioned about women leadership, how women are empowered, how countries come and see what happened in our country. They're like, we don't understand how you came from far and you're here today. And you were way behind us, now you are here. And this is something that we are proud of, and we think we have to raise that awareness too, that our country came from far and now it's getting really, really far again, even more than you can imagine. And something else to mention about it is that even if the genocide really hit our country, it's in the process of progress that is continuing. It doesn't stop. And together we are committed and engaged to be there for our country. And
I think one example that I can think of resilience, and not so much on a country level, but this is a story of many people. I want you to picture yourself, in your day-to-day life, right? You're living your life, going to work, school, have children, whatever the case might be, and to go from that to maybe being the sole survivor in your family, right? No, your home is gone, your family that you relied on is gone, and maybe you have even physical wounds, right? Some people survived, but they had physical wounds that they need to tend to, maybe missing limbs, things like that could limit you. Already surviving that is huge, but then picture going back to your hometown or home, wherever you're from. Keep in mind your home is gone, completely destroyed or burned. You have no possessions whatsoever, and your next door neighbor happens to be the person who murdered your entire family. Yet you still have no choice but try to rebuild right in your old plot and live next to this person who essentially maybe still has their own family intact, and they have their own possession, even more possessions that they acquired during the genocide. So there's been a lot of resilience in that sense. The fact that we, as survivors, and mostly those who are still living back in the country, are able to get up in the morning, go to work, contribute, have children, be able to be functioning members of society. I think that is a great testament to how resilient our people are. And you can see that if you go to visit. We're a very small country, so there's essentially no option but to live that life. Yeah. And I think, to me, when I think of resilience, that's where I go back to, because I'm lucky enough that I live here and I can sort of pick and choose when to deal with certain things, but a lot of people live with that kind of reminder on a regular daily basis, and they still are able to move forward.
I remember in high school, we were in boarding schools, so we would go to school with kids from perpetrator families, and you would sit right next to each other. So it was really hard during April to go through that, and most of the kids will get traumatized, and hospitals will be filled by our fellow survivors. But I remember one day going to school, if you have parents or a guardian would tell you, you have to behave, you're a young girl, and this. I remember the one thing my mom always told me. I was one of the lucky ones that had a parent. I reunited with her after genocide, and she would say, "Do not dare get traumatized." That's the only word she told me when I was going to school. But in her mind, she was terrified that she's gonna lose us mentally as well. And I will go to school thinking of that. So I will be, if a child is getting traumatized, all I did was, no, they cannot. So I will forget my own problems to just make sure this is something bad. So I always grew up thinking that this is something that can happen to me, and I don't want it to happen to someone else. And I guess that a lot of families grew with that resilience, knowing that we are fragile, and but it doesn't make us weak.
I think when we talk about resilience, it's essentially finding something meaningful to live for after something like
Absolutely.
a genocide. So I remember 1994, I was only 14 turning 15. My mom, I was lucky to have her survive. She had survived the genocide, but she kept going back home in Butare because we were living in Kigali at the time. I never understood why she kept going back to her hometown, to her house, which was empty, destroyed, nothing in there. And she wouldn't stop there. She would go to her house, there was nothing, nobody, then she would go to her uncle's houses as well. I never understood what she was really looking for until she found 2 children. One survived out of 6 children of her brother, one of her brothers. That he had 6 children, and all of them had died, including him and his wife. Only one had survived. That means out of 6, 1 survived. And from her uncle's family, 3 families combined, they had a whole hill for themselves. Only 1 child, a grandson to one of my mom's uncle, had survived. When she found them, actually that little boy was only 9 years old, and he was living on the street. When he found them, he could not wait until he brought them back home. When she brought them home, she never went back. I think she had found something to live for. I was her only child, but she didn't rest until she found somebody, something that she could hold on to from her family.
Right.
And she kept reminding me that I'm responsible for them. I wasn't older than them, but she reminded me that I was responsible for them.
Right.
And I never understood it until really, really late in life. That was her way of trying to understand that her family is gone, but she was looking for something she can hold on to as she keeps living.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things you can remember when you come to Rwanda, for those who are able to come to Rwanda, because when you arrive in Rwanda, you will never see something like that. You will never see sorrow in our eyes. You will never see pain in our eyes. You're going to find people who are so warm and welcoming, very happy, nice, with a smile on their faces. You want to know that probably they didn't have their dinner or lunch. You won't see any of that because they are so happy. They look so happy. But they have that thing they need to be able to hold on to as they are moving forward. It doesn't have to be big, but it's something they need to be able to hold on to. And as a country, we held onto our history, which was not good, but to be able to move forward and not to repeat that, we had to keep in mind what happened, and we had to keep in mind what it took from us, so that as we're moving forward, we are also making sure that nothing as such will repeat itself.
Yeah, I mean, I had the experience at this is a very personal level, and I was at the airport leaving, and a friend of mine, Odette, who's physician, senator, etc., she was at the airport with me. We were in the VIP lounge, and we were sitting on a sofa together, and the plane was out on the tarmac, and Odette is about my age. She's one of the ones I had brought here in 2001 to be here at the forum and speaking to you all. And so she said, "Oh, Swanee, we've been together these several days," and she wouldn't call me Swanee, Ambassador Swanee. and she said, "And I haven't said to you how sorry I am about the death of Charles, my husband of 25 years. And it was a fresh experience for me, and I had tears then, streaming down my face. And I said, "Oh, Dad, I can't believe I'm crying." I just sort of suddenly realized, here I am in Kigali, the place where 10% of the population in Rwanda had been slaughtered in 3 months. I mean, that's like 32 million Americans this spring. I mean, that is unbelievable if you put it in the terms 10% of our population. So I'm sitting there and I said, I can't believe I'm doing this. I mean, Odette, you lost 40 members of your family. And she said, no, it was 70. And I thought, and she'd been over in Uganda at school, and so the genocide was happening. She came across the border. Her sister started running to her without, 2 arms had been chopped off and died in her arms. And before she died, she said, "Mother's been buried alive." And, it was one of those stories that, you all know, you've all heard them. And then she said to me, "But Ambassador Swanee, every pain is pain. Every pain is pain, and, it's the same pain." And I thought to myself, actually, no. There is a difference. And if we don't keep that difference in mind, we are not being who we need to be in the world. I've never told you all that story, but it's one that I carry because it's so meaningful to me at so many levels.
That sort of reminds me of when I moved here. I was in high school, and a couple of things happened. One, in Rwanda, most kids had lost at least one parent. So there was an unspoken rule that nobody really talked about their parents, even those who had them. And so I had spent 4.5 years in boarding school with about 1,500 kids. Never once did I hear anyone talk about their parents, right? It was just, and I didn't really realize it until I moved here, and all of a sudden, that's all anyone talks about. And I was in my history class. I had my teacher, she was maybe late 50s, early 60s, and I remember she was telling a random story about her weekend, said something about her mother, and I just stopped. And I was looking at her in my head going, she has a mother? I don't think I had known anybody who was that old. In my mind, as a kid, I had not met anyone that old who had a mother. And it's things like that that just sort of remind you that, yes, we did suffer great loss. But the same teacher actually later on, her cat died, and she came to class and she was very upset, understandably so. I did not get it. I remember going home very angry about the fact that somebody was that distraught about a dead cat. And my mom actually is the one that was able to essentially frame that, right? If that's the most important thing that you've lost in your life, you can't really kind of compare your pain to somebody else's because, that's just it might feel as much pain right now as you feel losing 5 members of your family. So it's kind of like a tricky thing to navigate, especially
right.
When you go out there and share your stories. One of the hardest thing is to tell the story in a way that doesn't make people for that uncomfortable, awkward silence, and then let's change the subject really quickly, which most of us are uncomfortable with death. So how do you talk about that kind of loss? And I probably put it to everyone. How are you able to talk about that kind of loss while at the same time keeping people engaged enough? You cannot translate that to people who haven't lived it, but at the same time, how do you
go about sharing that information and keeping that conversation going?
I feel like as a listener, if someone's sharing with you, pain is pain. That's when you're sharing, you don't see it because you're sharing to someone, but you're sharing to feel felt, you know? So if I went through genocide and someone comes to me, I just lost a mom, the pain they have in that moment, me as a listener, it's pain. So maybe that's where, that's where the difference can be, because when you're not feeling the pain of someone else, you're losing something within. You've lost. If you can feel other people's pain, that means the empathy in you is you're human. Because I think even during the genocide, the perpetrators, like you mentioned, the dehumanization, all of that, they didn't feel the pain of Tutsis because they were not human in their eyes. So when they justified killing a child, an elderly person, because for them, killing them, they're not feeling pain. They weren't feeling pain of those people. It's a weird example, but even now, when you were at work, we were talking about it earlier, and your coworker loses a family member. Pain is pain, especially with someone who's lost a family member before. You know how it feels. So directly, it makes you go back there right away and feel that person's pain. So it kind of, I think that's what you also were talking about your mom going to find her nephews, because her heart, feeling the pain of her nephews and bringing them and helping them, kept her alive. So still having that, it makes you not give up on life, knowing that I'm here for a reason. I'm not just here because I just survived, I am here to make a difference. I am here because somebody else has been through something like this, and if I'm here, I can let them know that they're going to be okay.
This is really helpful. This is really helpful to me. And because now I have more understanding of why Odette needed to say that to me.
Yeah.
And I don't think she consciously needed, but I needed to be able to say, no, this is not genocide, because I needed to have some kind of... empathy is way too shallow for an outsider to be talking about how But on the other hand, she needed to have empathy for me to be fully human.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
get that.
Yeah.
I get that now.
And you gave her the same thing, because you're like, no, you lost 70 people. You're the one, So that was more a human connection.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah, and to add on what both of you said, what makes our history very unique and strong is that we lost 1 million, even more than 1 million lives in 100 days. Those people didn't get sick. We didn't get time to, when you have somebody who is very sick, you get time to get ready, to get prepared, to mourn. We didn't have time to mourn. We didn't have time to get ready. And they were killed all of a sudden with no reason. Babies, elders, mothers, pregnant mothers, and, newly mothers were tortured and really went through the worst. So the fact that they were not sick, and we didn't expect them to be killed in 100 days, it's something we cannot understand, and it's really hard on us to manage with the consequences that it brought to our lives. Perpetrators killed everybody. They didn't have mercy on anybody who was sick, who cannot hide. And whenever somebody says about the genocide, the worst of the genocide, like Odette was telling you, it's really hard, because when you have to lose everybody, it's kind of it's more than losing a treasure. You lose siblings, parents, friends, close friends, you lose neighborhood, you lose family. You have to start over. it's really hard, and even if pain is pain, that's
know.
more than pain.
It is.
I'm going to very soon open this up. Who started to say something?
Yes,
You-
I just wanted to say, you know, one of the most significant things I think I've seen when I was in Rwanda is the creation of families of people who never even knew each other, whether they were in high school or university, coming together to be there for each other's weddings, births, etc., and how those groups of people, maybe 20 or 30 youth, actually became very seriously family, to the point where they say, I can't marry a brother or sister in my family, even though they're not related. And that seriousness, I think it really does what we're talking about, brings back the humanity. It's those ways to recognize, you know, you may have lost your biological family and nothing can replace that. I work in justice. We give a tall order to say we can provide justice, but we cannot replace the people you lost. But when I listen to them, certain friends talk about their family, oh, my brother's getting married, my brother just got engaged, my sister gave birth, and the light in their eyes and the way they talk about it, I can see something being restored, even though they can't always see it. And I try to tell them that and validate how those families have become real for them. And I think that is kind of what you're, you know, a way of rehumanizing as well.
It's not that those families became real. They are real. Why are they real? These are young people. Most of those you're talking about, they are young people who survived, and they were only children without families. And when we went back to school, which was very in the late 94, early 95, those children either didn't go to school because they did not have anybody to send them to school, or when they went to school, they remained at school when everybody else went home during the holidays. What does that tell you? It's either you stay at school because you have nowhere else to go, or you don't go to school. So that was not going to be an option if survivors, those young survivors, had to live and grow. That's why they came together. They formed associations of student genocide survivors. So among themselves, they had parents. Not that they were older, but they had to have responsibles among themselves so that they can know how to handle whatever issue they had, to be able to know where to find money to get school materials for schools, uniforms, what they need to for the bedding when they go to school. All those things had to be found, and not everyone knew where to find them. So they had to have somebody responsible for everybody else. So they became parents of each other so that they can be able to go to school and to feel supported. Because we all know what happens when you are all alone and you don't have support.
And can you imagine a 16-year-old negotiating with school administration to waive school fees, to give more soap? A 16-year-old American, could you imagine that? With their principal, this is what happened. You know, at that age, they were taking care of their own peers, speaking to headmasters, etc. And for me, I can't imagine being 16, being responsible for 30 other young people, and then having to go to my principal of authority and say, look, we need these things. That kind of advocacy from the mothers, especially of these families, was so significant. I just can't imagine even American youth doing that right now.
I want to continue this, but I want you to be part of it too. So how about anyone who would like to join this conversation? There are 4 microphones, and remember that a question ends with a question mark. And you see, I'm very good at cutting people off and interrupting, so, as you noticed. And so anyone who would like to ask a question, help yourselves to a microphone. Oh, and introduce yourself, would you please?
My name is Dragana. I'm a fellow at the Berkman Center. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your insight. As a Bosnian person, there's a lot of resonance in what you said. My question is, when we see what happened, for example, in Myanmar, in the Rakhine province, there was a genocide that happened quite recently.
Yeah.
Do you also feel this responsibility, and especially considering the lack of intervention from the international community, complete inaction in Rwanda, and in our case, that came at the very end? What kind of action, because I feel a responsibility when I see this, and I don't know quite how to act, besides stay informed. And so I was wondering if I could hear from you for what is our responsibility to prevent and educate and fight for other women in these situations?
Like I mentioned, working at the Kigali Genocide Memorial Center, and when I had to work with women, genocide survivors, mostly women who have been gang raped, and some of them cannot even get out of their houses for the past 25 years due to the hardship they went through with all that happened to them, made me realize that I might be only one person, I might not be wealthy, I might not be a very known person or important person, but if you start by either looking for ways to advocate for them, being able to knock on doors where you tell to those people they can do something to help, this is the situation, we need help. But don't stop even if you are turned down, because if you stop, then you are giving up. What we, genocide survivors against the Tutsi in Rwanda, we did not do is giving up. Because if we had given up, we would have died. So you cannot give up if you have somebody who's down and needs to be lifted up. The only thing you can do as a person, first of all, you need to be able to try to help, do the advocacy, try to help on your ways, but do also the education part. Try to speak up, be able to explain, and in a very way that people you are talking to are able to understand, in a very respectful way, I would say, so that people understand that you are not being, I would say, rude or mean or anything, but you are trying to pass a message through so that what happened to your people does not happen to other people.
I think what I would like to add is we all like to think of ourselves as good people. I would venture to assume that we're all against genocide, but there's a disconnect between what we think we stand for and what we actually physically stand for. And one of the things that we have to do, and it's a balancing act, right? You have to, yes, to do the advocacy, and but you also have to understand the system enough to know what works and what doesn't. And whether that means rounding up 500 people to write to a congressman, right? Like, you have to break it down into action items that would work in order to not get discouraged, because there's the balance between living this life of going there and talking and feeling like you're not getting anything accomplished, and that can weigh on you so much that you forget the self-care that you need, right? So I think creating partnerships and coalitions, trying to figure out what works in what situation. And sometimes, I hate to say this, sometimes you just know that, this is not going to work, and we'll live to fight another day, but this is not going to make a difference. I wish I had an answer and a solution, but unfortunately, really, it's hard work to do, but it requires sort of being self-aware and understanding what you can and cannot do, and then maybe reaching out to other people and forming those groups.
But you said a word that is that brings a thought to me. Will you forgive me? But you said partnerships. Do you all have a sense of what kind of partnerships, like if you look at a room here, these are very well-educated people, they all lots of privilege here, all kinds of privilege. And so they have gone to the trouble of getting in their cars or whatever and deciding to spend this time with you, which means they are really motivated. There are a lot of places they could be this evening. So what's the next step for them? What kind of partnerships would be the most helpful to you all?
Honestly, if you want to help Rwandan women of Rwanda, genocide survivors of Rwanda, or genocide survivors of other genocides around the world, first of all, get close to them, listen to them, so that you can be able to know what is it they need, what is it they want, how are they thinking to move forward, what is their plan moving forward, because you can do so much by helping them to go to the direction they are thinking of, or they think it's appropriate and it's good for them. But if you think you know all that they need without talking to them, you might provide resources and ways and means, but those resources that you might provide might not be used to what they should be used for, because they are not provided in the right way. You don't know what they need, you don't know what they want, thus you are giving things that are not going to really to hit the purpose.
Yep. So find a way to be. Yeah.
Find an organizations, because most of the time there are organizations that are working in the field, and do a lot of research, really find out what's going on and how you can advocate in the right way. Because sometimes, most of the genocide, there's a lot of miscommunication, especially when, genocides are planned and prepared by governments. So they make sure they block media to share the right information. And sometimes in the world outside of that place, they only find out what that government is giving them. So most of the time it's wrong, but there could be we had some non-profits in Rwanda that knew what was going on, and they will get silenced early 90s, and some of them will get killed. But when you have that calling of helping, there's so many ways. There's so many ways you can find through other people, through non-profits. There's now social media, people share now in a picture of something that's happening, and then that everyone else is gonna find out, and there's a way you can call out those wrong leaders, and just and I know most of the time though, hate is really loud. So when people have that anger and hate, they share it. They're so loud, and then when you have that kindness and love in you, you kind of shy away, because you're terrified of what people are going to think. But if you can be able to, I have this love fire in me, I'm going to share it out loud. It may not be safe, because the hateful people are still, so if you all use your voices, like any person who was here tonight, just using their voice to bring up important things about how you can connect with other humans around the world, because we're all the same. We all same humans. We all have the same needs, basic needs, and just knowing that, and knowing that in this life, we live. At least the oldest person on this earth is 100, maybe 30. Let's say that. Mm-hmm. But if you know that you are going to live to 130, what meaning are you going to bring to your own life? I
think also, just to very briefly add, what you said. I love this concept of the love fire that has to be louder than the hate. But what I really think also is that sometimes looking beyond organizations is also helpful, that even though you might be one person, like Yvonne said, maybe you don't have the right money or the right, title or whatever, the love fire means that you really care, and that care can manifest in editing a young girl's CV so she can get a job, or so she can bridge the gap and go to university, sometimes people think, oh, that job is too small for me. I don't want to take the time editing, whatever. But that's actually, as Yvonne said and as Didine said, the thing that's the most needed in that moment are those skills, or is to borrow a laptop. Those things that we think don't make a huge difference, but actually get someone to where they need to be and bridge those gaps. And that often can be person to person and by listening.
You all have been very patient. No, we're at the microphone. Yes.
Good evening. So my name is Naomi, and thank you so much for coming this evening. I'm sure all of us are speechless in many ways, but some of the things that you said that was actually shocking is that what I think many people would feel hopeless after your experience, many experiences, that you all had mentioned that you were very hopeful. And so my question is, in our society, we have a very high teenage rate of suicide. And I would consider all of you parents, whether you have children or not, but your story tells me you've parented other children. What could you say to parents to help them, bridge that chasm between hopelessness that they may see around them to that hopefulness that you all were able to encourage each other with in your experiences?
So the question is, given the teen suicide,
Right.
and all of these parents who are suffering through this, what would they say to
encourage young people and parents as far as that turning that hopelessness around to hopefulness?
Got it.
I think, thank you so much for asking that question. So what made us going, all of us, after losing almost everything you had, losing parents, losing siblings, losing your home and friends, losing school, everything you have, and you have to start from the scratch, but you still say, I have to keep going. There is nothing that is going to stop me. It's just the reason that made us really hopeful is to justify that even if the killers wanted to take away the lives of the loved ones of our families, this is going to be something they thought, but that is not a reality. We are standing, we survived, we have to be there for them, we have to fill the gap, we have to live to prove the opposite of what they were thinking. So if I was talking to a mother or a father with a child that is facing suicidal situation, I can tell them that the fact that they can look up my example, life goes on, and you have to live. There is nothing that has to stop your life. Your life has a purpose that is not going to stop at any point. And hope of living comes within you, and you have to keep that hope shine. And that is the way you're going to keep going, even if something comes in your head, but you have to choose to live. You have to choose hope instead of despair.
Yes, I hope that gave you something. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Savella. I'm a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center and also a fellow here at the Carr Center for Human Rights. I hope you may
also, I'm sorry, what was the second?
Also a fellow here at the Carr Center for Human Rights at the Kennedy School.
Yes.
I hope you may allow me to ask very quickly 2 questions. You spoke about community, collective action, showing empathy, and this sound like principles of this Pan-African philosophy of Ubuntu. And so I would like to know, what is the role of culture and spirituality in the healing process? My second quick question is that although women have made great gains in Rwanda, there is some critique in that the government might not be open enough and is essentially a one-party state with a long presidency. And so would you see this as a model for other African nations, considering the economic gains that Rwanda has had? Do you think there can be more democratic freedoms and the empowerment of women, or is it necessary to choose one thing at a time and then address the other later?
Thank you. I'm gonna answer your second question. I hope somebody else can answer ubumuntu question, because that's from our language, means having the humanity. So you have a very interesting perspective on the leadership in my country. But I'm not gonna talk about the leadership in general. And I'm not gonna talk about everything else that is being done in our leadership. I'm gonna focus on women, because when we are empowering women from the grassroots, that means from those who are not educated up to those who are educated on the doctorate level of education. That means what you are lifting the country as a whole, because when you have a strong woman empowered in all her capacities, then you are able to harness strength and skills from all the directions. So for me, my focus is on the leadership that is being instilled in women. You know, because when you are giving a loan, for example, a loan for a woman in the up country in the village who doesn't know how, who's not educated, illiterate, literally, but who knows how to count, and you give them, you ask them to put together a project for any type of business or any lucrative, you know, project that they can put together, and when they do put that together, and you just look at it and you approve it for the fundings, then you provide the fundings for them, and they can be able to run that project successfully, which in the long run empowers them as a person, as a woman, as a mother, lift their family, and they also get to also provide jobs, you know, to their neighbors, and also provide fundings to their neighbors in, you know, in the neighborhood. That tells you what is the focus here is to lift individuals and the community at the same time. What happens on the other side of the leadership? Personally, I don't look at it so much, because I'm like, if we have strong women who are educated, because I'm looking up to them. If I'm here right now pursuing my master's in social work, it's simply because I've seen that it works. I cannot choose to focus on one thing that might be going wrong, because if I focus on that one, I might lose the sight of the development of the country. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And it's not that I'm ignoring what is happening, but I'm trying to focus on positivity. Right. As a genocide survivor, that's what led me to where I am today, and that's what I'm gonna hold on to and keep going.
Yeah. Yvonne is touching on a really sweet part of this story, which is the women in the parliament. The first law that they were able to pass was the inheritance law. And so if, in fact, you can't inherit property, you're very limited. Your husband dies and the property goes to his brother, et cetera, et cetera. So they got this law passed, and now the women had collateral. And with that collateral, they could get a loan. So there were these community banks. But you've got to have a business plan that you're getting the loan for. And so you've got to have a community development structure to help you put together the business plan. And so there's always this chain reaction. And so the women get into parliament, and they get the inheritance law passed, and then you get the collateral, and then et cetera. So if you look, and then there's seed money that's put up by the government. And the people who actually ended up writing up the business plans, getting the loans, et cetera, they were way disproportionately teenagers and women. And that is what has really been seeding this economic progress. Yes.
Did you want to touch on Ubuntu and
Swanee?
And then I've got to move to some other, yes.
Do you want to touch briefly on the Ubuntu?
Sure. I was going to add one point on what you were saying about we just have to remember that it's been only 25 years that genocide happened, and before then it took only 30 years, like literally 3 decades of teaching hatred, and then we got to genocide. So to unlearn that, it's been only 25 years, and it's so easy to teach hate than teaching love. I'm big on love and the community and all of that. So it really takes a special kinds of people to be able to even like you said, to be a role model for the entire continent, or even the whole world. So we are doing everything we can as individuals. And if every individual can touch another life, I think we're doing all right, right? So about community and spirituality and all of that, Rwanda is a very ancient country. So we have a lot of traditions from hundreds of years. So and we have one thing that we do every first Saturday of a month, where it's a community work. So everyone in Rwanda, from president to the poorest person, we all go out and clean the streets, clean neighborhoods, build a home for someone who doesn't have a home. So that time, it's time for neighbors to connect. And most of the time, there are conversations about afterwards. So you kind of get to know each other and know who has what problem and all this, which is here in America, most of the time, people live in the same building and they don't know each other. So we're trying to learn that, here, to not know your neighbor. And sometimes, which is not a good thing, though, you should work on that. And but in Rwanda, what you mentioned something earlier about when you get to Rwanda, everyone is smiling. It's culturally, they know that when you smile at a person, that smile literally lights up their heart. So you kind of change that person's mood. So it's a big thing that it's culturally, it's just in our nature. So even when you didn't eat, I remember when we were kids, we wouldn't have food. But culturally, you wouldn't tell anyone that you didn't eat. Mm-hmm. You would say, I'm okay. And someone will ask you, how are you? And you probably, nothing's going right in your life. But you was like, I'm good. They will ask you, where are you going? I'm going down there. Because maybe you're going, you don't want them to know. But you want them to feel good. So it's more about that other person, and when you feel about that other person, it kind of helps you as that's where the empathy, the humanity that stays in you. It's because you're caring for that other person, and it kind of builds you up and fills your heart. So that's
and I do have to jump in and say this is not Emerald City. Right? And we're not looking, Emerald City. So we're not looking for the man behind the curtain.
Right, yes.
But I'll tell you, because there are all kinds of problems. I mean, in the conversations earlier this afternoon, one of you was talking about, back in the village, there's still someone who's trying to kill you, or probably is, genocidaire, or at least a perpetrator, I should say, is still there in the village. And so how do you feel safe ever? And what do you do with all of those feelings, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And the justice system that we hear so much about. 2 million people went through this gacaca, which means on the grass, where perpetrators would be brought, and the village would decide essentially. This man, he said he was down at the river that day with his friend, and somebody else says, no, I've known that kid since before he was born. He's lying. And it's that kind of conversation as the village decides. So we can say, oh, how fabulous, but out of 2 million people, you bet there was terrible, injustice, and so it's never perfect. And you find the same thing with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa that we think is so glowing. But go to South Africa and talk to South Africans, and you're going to have a certain number of them who are saying, wait a minute, and they're going to tell you all the things wrong with it, and those things are real, right? And so I just want to disavow us from saying, oh gosh, why don't we just all move to Rwanda and our lives will be happy, because everyone's going to be smiling at us, when we get off the plane.
One of the things I learned when I was in Rwanda, I had a close friend and they were really suffering. And I said, are you okay? And they said, I'm fine. And I said, you're not fine. And he said, Samantha, you don't understand. I'm fine. If I don't say I'm fine, it means I might not be fine. I'm fine means I will be fine. And so I have to say that. In our culture, I have to say that because it's the only thing that will mean that I will be fine. I was like, no, be honest, be free with your feelings, etc. They were like, no, this is my choice. I'm fine, meaning I will be fine. It was something I learned very early on when speaking to Rwandans, that when they say I'm fine, it means something very deep.
Yes. Anyone else? Yes, please. And identify yourself.
Yes, hi. My name is Fiona Turner, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm actually doing a comparative film project about peace in different nations. So I'm particularly interested in the conversation this evening. And one of the a question I'd like to put to you is looking at how your country has moved forward over the past 25 years and the strength in your leadership. I wonder how much you see recovery is due to the legislation that has taken place, which has, for instance, outlawed ethnic identity and tribal identities, which has encouraged perpetrators to be able to live alongside victims, that has encouraged women's positions, and how much is due to the resilience that you've described and the general nature of the people. You know, are we looking at a country where it's the law has pushed peace forward, and would this have happened without it, or to what degree?
I think a very significant part of your question is the last three words, to what degree, right? Because it's obviously marbled. Yes.
I'd say personally, I think a lot of it has to do with the law and the climate in the country, only because we have seen what we're capable of. So it's not like Rwanda was all of a sudden transformed. We have, millions of people who committed atrocious acts who still live there. And I do not think that they had a change of heart overnight. So I think a lot of it has to do with the law. A lot of it has to do with what was made acceptable and unacceptable. And I truly believe that given the opportunity, most of those people would go back to killing. So in my own opinion, I think a lot of it has to do with the structure and the laws in place that make those things unacceptable and intolerable. But that's just my opinion.
Before I came here, I think it was the 20th commemoration, we're doing archive materials, and we'll go around the country interviewing people from different backgrounds. The people are still in the prison, the survivors, and you will get to prison, you will interview someone, and you would realize that person, if they had a chance, especially if they look on your wrist, you're wearing something about remembrance, you would definitely see that the hate and the anger is still there, like vivid, like 1994. They still live in that era, and even though we will try to teach love and reconciliation, unity, all of that, but we're also human, and if we can change, we can try, but we can't change everyone. If you see someone like that in prison, still believes that's maybe that two people that I've met, but there are people who are in Europe who fled, who did not even, get punished for what they did, and they still believe the same way, and they're still probably preaching the same hateful messages. So I think it's a burden that Rwandans have to live with, because we did not ask for genocide to happen, and we never experienced it before. So we were not prepared to live that life after genocide. But every tool that we had to be able, because remember, genocide was committed by Rwandans, and they were killing Rwandans are the ones that stopped it. So this is a country that after 94, there were a lot of emotions that we all got together. People are coming back from, because you remember, you mentioned about 1959, there were civil wars. They killed a lot of Tutsis, and most of them fled to neighboring countries. So after 94, it was the time that some people are in jail, other people are fleeing to Europe, other people are coming back home, other people had lost everything. So you had all these people in one tiny country going to live together and figure out how they're going to cohabitate. So, so there was all these things that we had to learn, or ideas that we had to come up with, so we can be able to not, lose our lives. Not commit suicide. She mentioned about teenagers here committing suicide. Most of us tried because we did not have that hope. You're seeing us here because we survived after surviving. We did not have this hope right away. It's a work in progress, and instead of looking on the darker side always of what's happening, how can we focus on the positive? And probably that positive will grow and outgrow the dark. So how are we doing this without creating more conflicts, so that we are not going back to genocide, because we know what that is and we don't wish it for anybody else to see it. So I feel like that's the questions that we should be asking ourselves tonight.
And we must, I hate to do it, but we must conclude this. And let me ask if one of you wants to close this with an image or something that is on your mind, your heart.
Thank you. I think I am having a message, and that message is for hope, and the message that is going to help the generation and people who were not in our country by the time the genocide took place. I have a story of my 5-year-old daughter. She's in kindergarten, and every month they want them to come with the grandparents to the breakfast. And every time when she wants to go, her school sends us a note. And by the time they send us a note, I start to panic. I'm like, where am I going to get a grandmother or grandfather? Because my husband and I, both of us now have a parent. And she went to school one day. Everybody had grandparents attending. And she came back home crying. I was like, what happened? I knew what happened, but I didn't want to mention anything. She said, Mommy, every time when I go to school and there is a breakfast, everybody's bringing grandmother or grandfather. Where is my grandmother? I said, baby, your grandmother is not here. She's not alive. Neither your grandfather on both sides. You're going to be there and you'll be fine. So I tried to explain her childish ways, how she's going to go to the breakfast, she's feeling fine even if she's 5, because it was breaking my heart to tell her that parents died not because they were sick, but because they were killed, because she doesn't even understand that. And she said, so, Mommy, can we borrow a grandmother or grandfather? And I was like, I'm not sure if we can borrow a parent.
She said, Mommy, can we
borrow a grandmother or grandfather?
Can we
because
borrow?
Because I feel only whenever I see that I don't have a grandparent attending my breakfast. It's something that was missing, and it really, really broke my heart to see that my baby is now enduring what I went through after 25 years. Now this thing is transitioning to another generation. And she's 5. There is no way I can make her understand that my parents and my husband's parents perished during the genocide. And she cried. It really broke my heart because I couldn't get somebody to borrow, because I can't borrow a parent. So we say that she's going to take it the way it is. She knows they're in heaven, and she knows that we will see them once. And something positive and strong about it is that even if she really went through that, I know that I'm doing this. We are raising awareness, all of us. We are bringing awareness alive to tell people what happened, because we don't want anybody else to endure what we endured. And nobody would like to explain to our 5-year-old that parents are not alive and she's going to be there all the time. So this is the reason why is keeping us, strong and going towards this mission of educating and telling people the worst side of the genocide. And we don't need anybody else to go through what we went through because it's already the worst. And we hope that people will understand our message and it will help in every generation, whatever the situation, can relate to what we went through.
And Providence, when I go back to one of the first questioners, I think that this is a wonderful room full of potential grandmothers and grandfathers who are just waiting to be borrowed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Atema.
I would like to end up with a song.
Oh.
I was in Rwanda. Many of you didn't see me 2 weeks after genocide with the Norwegian tragedy.
Oh, wow.
With a lot of women. That is in the past. I'm so happy to see you. So my song is The Sun Rises. When the sun rises and it sets, it shows us that there is hope. Whoa, mama, koi, hey, 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 barakanza, harmonica, hey, hey. Oi, barana, kwali, kalere, sikaya, wokoni, maya, teanika. Subirangani kaye, oi, subirangani kaye, ya, subirangani kaye, yo, hey, mama, ye, kone, kase, ye, tambeni, hakaku, habarakana, kashe, ye, hamarikoni, ye.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. That's it.